This was a paranormal story that happened to my mom when she was 9. She and her family lived on the outskirts of a small town in the Monterey Bay area in 1975. The house my mom lived in was on top of a hill with a winding road leading to it, facing a lake. There are no neighbors, and the other houses were a distance away. What my mom knew of the house was that it was built in 1927. It was an old white wooden Victorian house. She said it was completely off to be built in the hills far away from Watsonville, California, a small town about 25 minutes east of Santa Cruz. It started off as a community for immigrant workers who came here for a better life. She said that the rooms were big with plastered walls and massive windows in every room. It had been repainted many times in the house's history, and the windows, they were all sealed shut. My mom recalled the windows were so high off the ground that you couldn't break into them. I'll warn you ahead that this is pretty disturbing, and if I sound dramatic, it's from my mom's point of view. So please bear with me. My grandparents worked far as they worked in the fields when my mom and her siblings moved to live in the United States from Mexico, and often left my mom and my tias and tios by themselves, with my older tia in charge. Mom and her siblings were used to being by themselves for long periods of time until my grandparents would come home from work. She says the property around the house had an old barn and a shed full of old rusty farming equipment. My mom and her siblings would spend the day exploring the nooks and crannies of the buildings, often pretending that they lived in those times and role-played. But often, Mom and her younger sister, Leticia, talked about strange things that would happen to one another, in or around the house. Tia Letty told my mom about the incidents that were happening to her. She would lie on her bed, looking up at a corner of the ceiling. She would tell my mom that she would see the corner was bellowing like it had lungs, and she is so scared that she would run out of the room. That is what Tia Letty's recollection of what happened to her was. But then, it was my mom's turn. One evening, my mom was in bed, facing the wall when she was sleeping. She always locked the door to her room. Being there in the dark by herself, she said she would be in a state where you're half asleep and half awake. But then she felt an ominous feeling. Weight on the edge of her bed. She was chilled with fear because she knew no one could possibly be in the room with her. She felt a motherly presence, she said, that was watching her as she slept. Mom wouldn't even dare to turn her head to look at whatever it was that was sat beside her on her bed. She was too scared to look at it because she thought she would die of fear if she saw what it was. She spent the whole night praying that it would go away and leave her alone. That was one of the many incidents that happened to her in that house. There was a second mysterious situation where my mom would hear knocks as if someone was there in the house with her. My mom would run to the door, excited that she heard knocks, but no one would be there. She said it happened at random, maybe 2 or 3 times in the day, any time that she was alone. She thought it was somebody pulling a prank, but it dawned on her that she had no neighbors for miles all around. That's when she became scared. Eventually, it stops, but it stayed with her. My mom was becoming increasingly more frightened because nothing would add up. She said she remembered that when the door knock stopped, there would be soft tappings between the walls. In the beginning, she thought she was hearing things and didn't pay much mind to it, but she constantly kept hearing those soft taps from inside the house. Day or night, it didn't matter. Mom didn't want to tell anybody because they would discount it as maybe her imagination was just working on overdrive. Her mind was slowly becoming fearful of what it could be. So, one night, my grandparents left to go food shopping in another town. My mom decided to stay by herself because she thought it was boring. But she completely forgot all about the things that were happening in the house. So later on, Mom was sitting in the living room, because they had left early, and she was thinking in her mind that they would come home before dark. She was there in the living room all alone while it was completely pitch black outside. She said that all she heard was the frogs croaking by the lake and crickets chirping. Mom said she was getting a feeling that she was being watched through the windows, but the windows were so high for someone to look through. At that point, she was running around the house like a headless chicken on full panic mode. She was so scared. She made a bad decision that she regrets to this day, of staying all alone. Like if it couldn't get any worse for my poor mom, the tapping started again, but this time even louder than it ever has been before. My mom was thinking that she was becoming insane or something of that. She thought maybe she was losing her head. She decided to confront whatever it was. And with doing that, she started following the noise where the tappings were coming from. It was towards the very back end of the house near the back door. As she inched closer and closer, she put her ear against an inner wall of a small dark closet near the back door, where the knocks were coming from inside. What she told me next gave me goosebumps, typing this down. She said that she heard the loud wailing noise of a baby bawling and crying as if it was trapped inside the closet. Mom didn't even bother to check this because it shook her up. Then, for a quick moment, the tapping inside the house came back, but much louder as if it was banging on the door. She ran all the way into her room and locked the door. When she got her rosary, Mom waited for what felt like forever for her family to get home. After that, she never thought about staying home alone again. After my mom was done hearing things, now she said she would finally see what it was doing all this ruckus to her. Yet on another dark night in the middle of summer, Mom and her siblings were eagerly waiting for her mom and dad to come home from work. She ran to the back door, anticipating his arrival. The mom opened the door without hesitation, and she remembers that she was completely scared of what she saw. She says at a distance, almost close to her, she says that she saw a solid soul shaped like a woman, completely white, floating across the backyard, going from one corner of the old barn to the other corners, where old water sheds used to be standing, that was demolished right after my mom moved in. It was knocked down because my grandparents were concerned that the old dilapidated shed would cave in and while my mom was playing in there with her brothers and sisters. When the woman reached the shed, she disappeared into thin air. My mom was speechless of what she saw and ran back into the house to tell my abuela. She couldn't even speak to my abuela, and after a while, when the fright left my mom, she told abuela of what it was. My abuela told my mom something chilling. Since my whole family was Catholic, and they kind of believed in the supernatural, my abuela thought that the ghost was a woman. Abuela thought that she could call her out and that the woman wouldn't stop trying to communicate with my mom. It's odd, because it just happened to her and only her, none of my other siblings. Abuela mentioned to my mom to say her, "What do you want next?" Mom complied, and when she did it, the woman never responded to her, and all the paranormal things stopped. Now that my mom told me this, she recalled that Tia Letty researched the house's history and freakishly found out that there were 5 children that lived in the house, just like my mom's family of 5. But if that wasn't scary enough, 4 of the 5 children's names were the exact same. Jose, Tio Jose, Anthony, Tio Anthony, Francisco, Tia Francisco, and then my mom's name, Maria. Disturbingly, one of the children were killed by a stray gunshot of a bullet in the house that was built in the 1920s. But the barn and the shed were built in the gold rush in California. I theorized that the woman thought my mom was the child who died in the house and wanted to contact her to see if it was her child. Just recently, last week we went to Watsonville for a family event and Tia Letty told that the house no longer stands and it was demolished a couple of years ago. Before I get into my experience, I should preface it with a few facts. I'm a biologist, and as such, I place a lot of weight of evidence and try to ignore eyewitness accounts and anecdotal experiences. To me, the word paranormal is a misnomer. There are simply things we don't understand yet. I also have to admit that I use cannabis frequently, but not for fun. It's at the direction of my physician. As such, I don't really use any strains that are strong enough to affect me in any other way than relieving pain and allowing me to fall asleep. I've been doing it for 2 years now, and I've never had an experience like I did 2 nights ago. We live in Southern California, and we recently moved to a beach city. Our new home is being remodeled, so we're staying in another home my family owns temporarily. My family only purchased this home a month back, and they haven't moved in or began to work on it yet. From the very outset, the house oozed with darkness and straight out weird floor plans that get you lost, doors to nowhere, a secret entrance to the garage, and a bonus room that is only 10 feet by 10 feet, has a skylight and 2 padlocks. I decided to lock that room and never go in it again, since it's going to be demolished soon anyway. There were mirrors everywhere, and it creeped the hell out of my wife. They looked like the mirrors from that horror film Oculus, but much smaller, when there were as many as 10. I removed those from the garage, except for the largest one, which was bolted onto the wall. I had no tools with me at the time. Once we got settled, I started to check the bedrooms out, and only got creepier from there. 2 of the bedrooms have windows, but these windows didn't go outside. They were one-way mirrors into other rooms in the house, including that creepy 10 by 10 room. I decided not to tell my wife about those 2 bedrooms and suggested that we put our air mattress in the living room. She didn't question this, as our furniture was in storage and there was no furniture in the home. She just assumed I wanted to watch the large television that was in that room. We went to sleep just fine that night. Actually, being thrilled that we moved in and had an ocean view, I pushed the creepiness out of my mind as the stress from the move. I dismissed the house's odd design and chalked it up to the original owners, who built the home in 1966, just being really bad at DIY, and that was lying to myself, to be honest. I woke up the next morning, and that's when things started to get bad. As I walked down the hallway, a large mirror caught my attention. I looked at the top of the name of the past owners that were carved into the mirror. It wrote, "Enjoy your new home, from Mr. and Mrs. We can call them Pizza." I'm not being derogatory or funny, but it's the first thing that comes to my mind about the previous owners, and something I probably should have mentioned before, because they had about 4 industrial-sized pizza ovens in the house. This was odd, because I was told they were hermits. Anyway, back to the mirror. I tried to get it down without tools for at least 10 minutes the day before. This carving was not there, but I ignored it and told myself I was just stressed and it must have been there the day before, I just didn't see it. But something in my stomach just told me that it wasn't. I decided we needed to get out of the house. It was sunny and we're 6 blocks from the beach. We didn't move to a beach city to sit inside all day anyway. We decided to put our new puppy in one of the bedrooms, as he's old enough to be on his own, but I wasn't ready to give him free rein of a new house, as huskies are known to be escape artists. We went out and had a good time. When I came back, I heard my puppy crying. I ran to the bedroom to let him out, but it was locked. From the inside, I could hear whispering, but not enough to make it out. "Screw this," I said, and kicked the door in. I didn't care since it was getting replaced anyway. I barged in and it was pitch black. It shouldn't have been, because I play a TV in the background with nature noises to calm the dog down while we are at home. I turned on the light and there was no one there. Not even my dog. I began to panic when I heard him crying again, but it was in another room. Not the one I put him in, and he certainly didn't do this on his own. Found him locked in that creepy 10 by 10 room. I let him out, assuming someone was screwing with us, and changed other locks. I went to sit on the air mattress in distress. I tried to get some guilty pleasure TV to make me feel better. I couldn't leave the house as there was a technician on the way to install Wi-Fi, which we desperately needed as there are times in this city where you can't even get a weak signal. The installation appointment window came and passed. I'm patient, so I waited another hour and a half before calling the company. By this time it was dark outside and they told me that there was an unforeseen issue and that they couldn't install it today and they would be there first thing in the morning, which I guess was fine. The night came and we fell asleep until about 3 a.m. when I heard a loud, rumbling growl. It's the only way I can really explain it, but not like you'd hear from a dog. Being a typically overcrowded beach city, there wasn't really any wildlife except for what's in the ocean. Next I heard a shattering noise. Yep, it was in the 10 by 10 room again. I went ready to finally fight the person who was screwing with us. I went into the room and of course there was no one there. I looked at my one-way mirror that went to the next bedroom. From the side you could see your reflection, but it was mostly shattered. I went to inspect it and there was a bullet hole. There was an exit bullet too. I'm sure of it because I've grown up with firearms my entire life since my dad is a cop. I don't think anyone else heard it. Also, it's also odd because the land is premium here. Our neighbors are less than 20 feet away. There was nothing I could do but lock the doors again and go back to sleep. Not telling my wife what I saw. Trying to push it out of my head altogether. The morning came and the internet service technician was there. I opened the door and he absolutely looked terrified and seemed like he didn't want to come in. When he saw me, he instantly relaxed and smiled like we were brothers who hadn't seen each other in years. He said he was happy to see me, assuming he was just being polite, so he got a good customer service response on those surveys they always ask you to take, but he continued at how relieved he was to see a normal person at this home. So, being curious, I quizzed him. He told me that most of the people in the neighborhood were afraid of this home. He told me that the neighborhood was initially settled by Italian immigrants, and the previous owners fit into that group. He told me that the woman who lived here was regarded as a practitioner of Stragaria. I had never heard of this before, but he told me it was an ancient form of mysticism rooted in Catholic roots. The closest English definition would be witchcraft. Being the cynical biologist that I was, I laughed, thanked him for coming, and he left. I went into one of the spare bedrooms because we left our luggage in there, and I didn't think it was necessary to move it. As I was, and am still skeptical for the most part. I only say most part because of what happened next. The closet door in the room was open, and it was an extremely heavy wooden sliding door that no one in the house would have had the strength to move other than me. There was a box of photos in there, and stupidly, I decided to look. Almost all of them were of the previous owner and her dog. She doesn't look so creepy to me, I thought. Time came for bed, and I was pretty stressed, so I went outside to smoke a little pot so I could chill out and fall asleep. The marine layer had rolled in and visibility was only 10 feet. It was also about 59 degrees. To some that might not be very cold, but we're spoiled here and it's enough to make all tourist beachgoers stay home. I sat outside and started getting my things ready to smoke. My wife came outside and we talked. It was extremely barren outside. There were no cars or people on the street and it was almost completely silent, except for the sound of a barking dog almost 2 blocks away. My wife went inside, and I went back to the edge of the yard where I smoked, so it doesn't go to the neighbor's window. In this section of the yard, I would perch on the ledge which normally would give you a beautiful view of the harbor lights, but not tonight with the fog. Oh well, I thought. It was about to light up when an extremely frail Caucasian woman that looked elderly came from around the corner. She was walking a dog, the dog I had seen in those photos from the box in the room. Lots of people like small dogs, I thought. In this part of town, they were almost an accessory. She walked by extremely slow, deliberately, slower than she would be for a normal person even her age. She walked past me and stopped at the neighbor's driveway, faced away looking at the harbor, which again was odd because you could see nothing. She did this for maybe 10 minutes. I assumed she hadn't noticed me. She began turning her head back and forth quickly in an unnatural jerking motion, as if she was paranoid about being attacked at any moment. I once more did something incredibly stupid. Jumping down from my perch, I said, "Hello, ma'am. Do you need help? Can I help you? Do you need help going inside or something where it's warm?" She said nothing but jerked her head once more, finally fixating on me. Her face was extremely grimaced, like she was angry. Not just normally angry, but ready to fight angry. I started to walk closer towards her, as I couldn't really make her face out. I had no fear. I'm 185 centimeters tall and weigh about 112 kilograms. She looked to be about 140 centimeters at most, and definitely no more than 45 kilograms if that. She took a step towards me, as well, and came into view. I was immediately terrified, and my heart rate was higher than it ever had been in my life. I felt like I just did hard cardio exercise. It was the woman from the photos. She was pale, paler than normal. She smelled like rotting flesh. She was soaking wet, but the worst part of it was her blood red eyes. They were nightmarish. I still have nightmares about them to this day. They were not just like pupils, but her entire eye was red. I screamed like a small child and jumped back, taking a defensive posture, ready to fight till the end. She then smiled and took a step back, fading into thin air. I decided I didn't need to sleep that night, as I was pretty terrified and didn't want to smoke that joint anymore. I called my mother the next morning and told her she needed to move up the demolition date of the house. I'm not sure if that would be the end of it. I don't have a concrete answer for my experiences either. Rational or not, my peace of mind is worth more. So we'll be staying at an extended stay hotel until our place is ready. Till this day, I can't explain what is happening inside that house. To start off, my name is Taylor. I am 20 years old and my fiance is 21. I have been with my fiance Austin for 3 years on Christmas. We dated for maybe 2 months before moving in together, as I was still 17 and in high school. A month before the end of my senior year, he moved in with my parents and I because of falling out with his brother. Then about 4 days before my graduation, we got our first house. It was not amazing or beautiful by any means, but it was ours. It wasn't in the best neighborhood, and it was cheap. The roof was really old. The basement leaked. All the windows were busted out, and the siding along the driveway was spray painted. But we slowly repaired it and made it much more livable. About 6 months into living there, weird things started to happen around the house. I thought it was just the house settling, or I was just getting spooked because I was in a new place. Some mornings, my clothes that I had laid out on the dresser were in a pile on the floor or thrown around the room. When I would be home alone, I would hear the floorboards in the hall creak like someone was walking on them. Multiple times, I would catch something out of the corner of my eye, and then I would turn around, but it would be gone. I never said anything to my fiance about it, because I thought he would tell me that it's nothing, until one day I saw him staring at a dark bedroom from the middle of the hall, and I called to him. He jumped and looked at me with fear in his eyes. Where'd you come from?" he asked, his voice shaking a bit. "I just came inside from the back porch. Why?" I responded, looking at him questioningly. "I just saw you standing in the dark in the bedroom. When I asked what you were doing, you just stood there and didn't acknowledge me. Then, when I heard the back door shut, I looked that way. When I looked back, you were just gone." Glancing from me to the darkened room. "Babe, I swear I was outside. Plus, you know I'm afraid of the dark. I wouldn't just stand in it for no reason." I inched closer to him and hugged him as I said that. When the next horrifying incident happened, it was a week before Christmas. I'm a very festive person, so there was always some sort of light on in the house, whether it be from outside the house or from the tree, or the lights I had put down the hallway to illuminate the path to the bedroom. This night in particular, I was super exhausted. I had just gotten home from work and I was settling in on the couch to watch some creepy videos on YouTube, but ended up passing out a few minutes in. I suddenly woke up to a deep silence. I always had some sort of fan or white noise to relax myself, but it was quiet and pitch black in my house. I tried to use my phone to illuminate the area, but as I pressed the home button, it showed it was dead. Great, I thought, realizing the situation I was in. All of my clocks were digital, so I didn't even know what time it was. I was too scared to move. It was too dark. Dark enough for something to hide right next to you, and you'd never know it. I stayed still, breathing slowly and trying to listen to any sounds around me. After a few minutes, I started to hear the creak of the basement stairs. Crap, can I lock the basement door when I got home? I didn't wait to find out, and I bolted from my bedroom, slamming it and locking the door as I heard the basement door slam open, and walking to the hallway. The way my house is set up, if you come through the back door, you can either go down a flight of stairs to the basement, or you have to go 3 steps to go to the doorway through the kitchen. From the kitchen, you can either keep going straight through the dining area into the living room, or you can turn and head to the hallway. At the hallway, the bathroom is in the right and to the center, and either ends of the hall are 2 bedrooms. I pressed my body against the door and sunk down, gripping my dead phone to my chest and trying to control my breathing. Whatever it was went to the other bedroom first, scratching on the door, and then slowly turning to bangs. When it got no response, it crept to my door, the door I had my back against. I knew it was too late to hide or move, so I planted my feet on the floor and gripped the carpet tightly, bracing for whatever was to come. I felt the door try to give as whatever it was pressed itself against the door, listening. I clapped a hand over my mouth and a muffled cry came out as a huge bang came against the door. It scratched and it beat against the door. I could hear something in my mind telling me that if I let this thing in here, my fiancé and family would never find my body. I kept myself pressed against the door for what felt like hours. Slowly, it walked away, creeping back to the basement, and I saw the glow of the hallway lights beneath my door. I looked out at my phone, and the bright Apple screen came up, powering it back on. So many messages and missed calls from my fiancé, wondering why my phone was off and what was going on. It was only 1 a.m. He was still at work closing up. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and stood up, carefully opening the door. I was horrified to find that there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Like everything had just gone on was in my mind and not in real life. I grabbed my vape, my phone, and a knife from my purse, and sat outside in the cold till Austin came home. I told him and he did not believe me. I was terrified to be in that house alone, but unfortunately, that night did not mark the end of my suffering and torment. On Christmas Eve, I waited in my car as long as I deemed necessary, till I had the courage to enter the house. It was completely black inside and I was scared. I took my flashlights I had near the door and turned them on facing the kitchen. 3 candles were lit and placed on the floor next to me, and I held Austin's BB guns in my hand. With every noise, I would pump the BB shotgun and mentally dare anything to come out. At about 11:55, I heard something start running around the outside of the house, banging on the windows and doors. I pumped the gun up to its full power and aimed it for the kitchen. I had intentionally left the door unlocked and was prepared for whatever to come in. The back door burst open and a figure raced up the stairs into the kitchen and I fired. The figure collapsed groaning. Only then did I realize it was Austin. He had come home from work early to surprise me and scare me. He laid on the floor groaning, cursing me as I helped him up. This time it was him, and I was so relieved. Next time, though, I knew it would be whatever attacked me the week before, and I would be ready again. To this day, I'm not entirely sure if this incident was a dream or real. It felt real, but the mere possibility of it was fantastical. Maybe my mind can't wrap itself around the idea that this actually happened, but my memory of it is so detailed, even to this day, that I can't say it was a dream either. My story took place in Brooklyn, New York, when I was 14 years old. I just started high school, and I was feeling more independent. I was finally able to get my own bedroom after my grandma moved out into a separate apartment from my family. Up to this point, I shared a bedroom with my younger sister. She's 3 years younger than me, and we've always got along fine when we were kids. But when I became a teenager, I felt the need to be more independent, to at least have my own room. And our parents agreed. When my room was finally all set up, it was awesome. I had my own bed and my own TV with video games. I could technically do whatever I wanted within the minimum interference from my folks. This room was a mini paradise and could not get better until it was time for bed. The drawback of being alone was being alone at night. When I turned off the lights, the room became pitch black. There was no moon for minimal light, and where my room was positioned, it was away from the streetlights. So, there was absolutely darkness. I was not used to this. When I was with my sister, there was some form of light coming in when it was time for bed, and now that I'm utterly alone, I felt like my senses were heightened. I could hear every little creak of the house, every little squeak of a mouse, and sometimes I felt like there was something else, a sense that I was not alone. The first few nights were tough, as I couldn't fall asleep quickly. I would usually fall asleep when it was really late, and I literally passed out from tiredness. I couldn't leave the TV on, since the glare of the light was too bright, and I felt like I would get in trouble if my parents found it on in the middle of the night. So, I decided to swallow my pride and get a nightlight. It wasn't too bright, just enough that I could see what was in my room. This small addition considerably boosted my confidence, and I was able to sleep much better. Things were great for the first few months, as I grew accustomed to being alone at night, and soon I didn't need the nightlight anymore. Finally, after a while, I began sleeping in the darkness, and it wasn't so bad. Things were normal until one night I woke up to something that sounded sort of like thunder, but more like a loud rush of air. I opened my eyes, and I looked around the room. When I looked at the window, there was a bright light shining in almost blinding. I couldn't wrap my head around what was happening to the point that I literally asked myself, am I dreaming? Then, a voice just growled in my head, no, you're not. The bright light went away, and I looked around frantically for what the hell could have made that freaking voice? Typically, if that would happen, I would have hidden under my sheets, but this time was different. I was more perplexed and curious than scared. I walked out of my room and looked down the halls, and I noticed my sister's bedroom door slightly open. I peeked in, and a cold shudder went down my back. The unbelievable was happening as I looked at my worst nightmare coming true. My sister was asleep, but there was a dark being kneeling next to her bed. He was on the other side of the bed, so I couldn't see the rest of his body. But what I saw wasn't human. I saw a demonic-looking face peering at me from the other side of the bed. His skin was bluish gray, and his face was harsh as black creases showed every wrinkle and definition of his face. It had jet black hair that was like a full lion's mane. It was so predominant that I didn't notice any other shoulders or anything below its head, although I could tell there was a body there. But the main thing I noticed, what really caught my attention, was its bright yellow eyes. They glowed as if it generated its own light. It was not reflecting any light from an outside source. And in the corner of the yellow orbs were just little black pupils. It stared me down at first. I couldn't move as I stared back. It felt like a good minute passed by before I noticed it move a little. Was it going to charge at me? Was it going to hurt my sister? I walked towards it, my main concern growing for my sister. And I walked towards it, slowly but deliberately. I wasn't sure if I could do anything to hurt it, and I wasn't even thinking of the repercussions. But I was not going to back down. When I closed halfway, I noticed it shifted slightly again, and then it began to melt into the darkness of the night. Within seconds, it was gone. Where did it go? I thought to myself. Was it real? How could something like that actually exist? Or was my mind playing tricks on me from lack of sleep? But I was awake, and I was aware of everything that was happening. So I looked around her bed and checked out all the corners and possible hiding spots, taking care not to wake her. After a few good minutes of searching, I was sure it was gone, or maybe never there in the first place. I thought about staying in the room with her for the rest of the night, but then I felt that whatever this thing was, if it was going to come back, there wasn't much that I could do. But my gut feeling grew that she was safe. When I was returning to my room, I thought to myself, what was that voice? Was it the creature that was stalking my sister, or was it something else, alerting me to the danger in the next room? As I settled back in my bed, I couldn't fall back asleep. I was still trying to comprehend what had just happened. Was that thing going to come back? Was it going to come for me next? I put my nightlight back on, the only piece of security I had left, and I eventually fell back asleep. I never told my sister of the incident because I didn't want to scare her. That thing never came back, although my sister seemed to develop a spiritual sensitivity to her surroundings, and sometimes I've heard her mention things like seeing things out of the corner of her eyes and sensing things that you can't normally see. Now that I'm an adult, I have 2 toddlers of my own and I love them dearly and would do anything to protect. I've never told my wife about the incident with that thing when I was a teenager. It's not from fear that she wouldn't believe me, but more she does. I doubt she would ever get a good night's sleep again. So, I have kept my little secret to myself. But now whenever I wake up in the middle of the night, I don't fall back asleep without checking in on my sleeping children. I have to make sure there's nothing evil lurking in their rooms at night.
I've been listening to your channel for a few months now, and I love it. It's been a huge help in reigniting my passion for the stories about the things I go bump in the night, the unexplainable, and the things lurking in the dark. I decided to share one of my stories about a suspecting haunting in a case that fits with your upcoming collections. I've changed the names for privacy. One of the most terrifying incidents that still gives me chills to this day happened when I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. My parents were separated at the time, and my mom was working second shift at a nearby plastics factory. My mom has someone else babysitting my little brothers, and I didn't want to be alone in the house, so my friend, I'll call her Sarah, would stay with me sometimes. I didn't know how to cook, but I loved baking and making my mom cakes or muffins so she had something warm and welcoming once she had come home from work. Anyway, so Sarah and I were upstairs in my 2-level house, baking another cake for my mom. It's dark outside, maybe around 7:30 at night, and there's a lull in our preteen nonsense, and that's when we hear whispering. We hear the voices of a man and a woman coming from the basement, and it sounds like they're arguing. Sarah and I distinctively freeze, and instinctively, I looked at her with wide-eyed terror. It was one of those moments where your stomach drops and you feel sick as the adrenaline begins to seep through your veins. For a few moments, we just listened, until suddenly, the voices stopped. Within a matter of seconds, we heard a boot at the bottom of the stairs where they start in the basement. We both bolted for the bathroom, grabbing a broom and a mop as we went, and locked ourselves inside. One by one, we heard thick, heavy thuds, as it very clearly sounded like someone was coming up the stairs. We heard the shuffle of steps on the first landing, where the front door is, and then the turn as they begin to climb the set of stairs on the main level. At this point, we were in tears and trying to be as quiet as possible, hoping that whoever is in the house won't be able to get into the bedroom. We hear the footsteps come through the hallway and go right into the door. Then, there's nothing but an occasional squeaking of floorboards, as if someone were shifting their weight from side to side. Curious as to what the heck is going on, I look under the crack of the doorway, praying that this intruder is gone. We had hardwood floors throughout the house, so there was a decent gap at the bottom of the door, and you could see just a bit of the floor in the hallway. With my face pressed against the bathroom floor, I peeked out. I could see two shadows, like the shadows of booted feet. There was a light in one of the halls that would have given that effect to anyone standing there. I stood again and backed to the far side of the bathroom with my friend, panicking, sure that some intruder was going to break in and do horrible things before killing us. For several moments, nothing happened. We stood there, hearts pounding, wielding broom and mop, ready to make some attempt at defending ourselves if we had to. Then, we heard the front door open and close. More footsteps made their way up to the top of the landing. Then, there's a slight pause. "Anna?" My mother called out for me. Sarah and I burst out of the bathroom crying and hysterically trying to tell my mom what happened. My mom searched the house and searched outside, but there was no sign that anyone was there or anyone had been there. My mom was worried that maybe there had been an intruder, but there was no explanation and not a single clue to support that conclusion. The back door in the basement couldn't have been opened due to it being waterlogged, and most of the windows in the basement had the same problem. Regardless, all of them were still locked when checked. We never heard any footsteps leave after I saw the shadows in front of the bathroom door, and there wasn't any silent way out of the house. There was no opening or closing of any doors. We had a regular exterior door that led to the deck, but it also had no problems, so it was incredibly hard and noisy to open and shut. Nothing was out of place, and we could never explain what happened that night. Sarah, understandably, didn't want to stay with me alone in the house anymore, and I couldn't blame her. Too bad I was stuck there. But the story doesn't end there. Around 17 years later, my niece, who lived for a long time with my dad and stepmom in the same house, was home alone after some school. My dad and stepmom often worked late into the night, as my dad owned his own business. She was a little older than I was when my incident happened, but she didn't have a friend with her. In a break between episodes of whatever show she was watching, she heard the whispering in the basement. Two voices, a man and a woman, arguing. Then, the footsteps coming from the basement. She also ran and locked herself in the bathroom, emerging hysterical once my dad and stepmom came home and called out for her. She never stayed alone in the house again. Here's the thing. She had never heard my story, as for a long time, I never talked about it. I especially wouldn't tell my story to little kids who had to live there. I never told my dad or stepmom about it either. And I never told my stepsister, my niece's mother, this story either. Of course, the concern was again that there was an intruder, but it was the same situation. The footsteps never left. She thought someone was in the front of the door until she heard my stepmom and dad come in, call for her. To this day, there is still no explanation for what happened. Now, my dad rents the house out, and I'm glad I don't ever have to go back there. But it was by far the most aggressive, terrifying, and physically real than any other strange occurrence in that house. Has anyone else ever experienced anything similar to this? I was experiencing a lot of weird paranormal stuff. It was really hard for me to get a nice sleep at night. For some reason, I was always hearing noises and seeing shadows inside and outside of my house. My best friend knew that I was going through a tough time, but never showed any fear of anything I would tell him. Sometime, he would spend the night over and we would watch movies. Every now and then, he would notice things around my house and tell me the next day. One night, I had told my best friend and my mom something that was bugging me. I had heard noises coming from outside my bedroom walls, knocks from my window, and footsteps on the roof. But of course, they didn't believe me, telling me it's all in my head, saying that I think about it too much, so I must have heard it in my mind or something. This would piss me off because why would I make something like this up? I told them how much that I would wish that I didn't hear this, so why would I want to? Later on that night, we were in the kitchen. My friend and I were sitting at the dining table doing some drawings and painting. My mother was listening to her music and cleaning the kitchen. My dad was visiting family in El Salvador at the time, so he wasn't around when this was happening. Anyways, as the night gets later, it's around 2 a.m., and we all hear a loud bang coming from outside the kitchen door. This is an exit door that's on the side of the house that leads to the backyard. Once we all heard that loud bang, we looked at each other like, what was that? My friend looks at me, saying, "Whoa." I could see that they got spooked as I looked back at them with a sinister smile. I didn't mean to smile at them like that, but after all that happened, it was all in my head. It got me excited that my wish was about to come true, that they are about to hear what goes down, and that I'm not the only one experiencing this anymore. I tell my mom to go open that door and see if it's all in her head. My friend is looking at the window that was wide open behind me. I think there's someone outside," he said. "It's nothing," I replied. I always had this sense of feeling when something was there. I knew no one was outside, but there was something out there. Then we hear the scratching along the walls going on in the backyard. Again, my mom and my best friend was shocked. I told her, "I told you so," but she wouldn't believe me. Now the only thing left is the footsteps on the roof. "Maybe it's a raccoon," my friend said. "I hope we get to hear the footsteps on the roof, then tell me that's a raccoon." My mom was amazed on how she got to hear all of this. I always told her what I would hear at night, but she never believed me. 15 minutes goes by, and there it was, the footsteps on the roof. The look my mom and my friend gave me was priceless. "Now tell me that's a raccoon," I said. My friend said, "Hell no, that's someone walking on your roof." My mom says it to my friend, "You're staying over tonight. I don't think it's a good idea to go home this late, especially with all that's going on." Suddenly, the noises started coming from my room. We all got up and rushed to my bedroom, this time thinking maybe it is someone trying to break in. We checked my room, and the window was shut closed. For the first time, I noticed something different, something I never thought was true. I had heard some people tell me that there's got to be some spirit or ghost attached to something. To get rid of the spirit, I need to find what that object is. Well, that night, I saw a shadow move out of the hallway and into a coconut monkey. It was a souvenir that my dad once gave me from El Salvador. The next day, I was too tired to go to school. I told my mom what I had seen, and she suggested that I should destroy it. Later that day, my friend came to my house again. I told him what I had seen and what I needed to do. He was all for it, so I grabbed a hammer and took it outside and destroyed it. My friend was tripping out on how this can be the reason why this was all happening. I hope this is it, and I hope this works. I slammed it into the ground and smashed it with my hammer, and that was the end of it. Days later, my mom noticed that I was sleeping better and the night was more peaceful. My friend still comes over, spends the nights. Everything was normal. About 1 month later, my dad comes back from El Salvador and tells me that he brought me another souvenir. I opened it and I can't believe what I saw. Another freaking coconut monkey.
I am a half-white, half-Mexican-American woman. I visited Mexico for the first time when I was 10, and my sister was 8. We went to Cancun. We went with my mom and grandma one night into town away from the resort. They speak Spanish, so we felt comfortable. I remember there were dirt roads and young children selling gum. My family came across a table in front of a store with lots of silver jewelry sprawled across it. I'm not sure where the rain stick came from, whether it was sitting on the table or someone else walked up with it. I just remember a Mexican showing the handmade rain stick to my little sister, and after a minute, my grandma gave some pesos to the person for it. It was 1.5 inches wide and about 13 inches long. It was cylinder-shaped and made of wood, flat on the ends. It looked really old and worn, but it was sturdy. There were 3 colorful bands of twine on each end. If you tilted it slowly to either side, it sounded just like rainfall. I assumed there was rice inside hitting the sticks as it fell down. We went back to the hotel with our newfound trinkets. Fast forward to when I was 18 in 2007, my mom and I were living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Plano, Texas. My sister was living in Michigan with our father. The computer desk was right next to my bed. There was a shelf on the other side of the bed with pictures on it. My mom had been going through old belongings and placed the rain stick on the left side of the shelf. I was sitting on the bed and my mom was sitting on front of the desk. I was bored and picked up the rain stick to hear the soothing sound of rain and bring back memories of my childhood. I thought it would be fun to start shaking it like an instrument and made a musical beat. As soon as I did that, I was in front of a fire in a circle of black people wearing little clothing. We were all sitting, surrounded by tall grass. No buildings, just out in nature. Their appearance was more shadowy when I say black, and the feeling that this was some sort of weird tribal or cult thing. I was playing the rain stick, shaking it, while some were chanting a foreign language. I did not recognize them. I noticed my hands were starting to turn shadowy black as well. I was back on the bed and my mom and I smelled smoke. It smelled like there was a fire burning in the apartment. We then witnessed a white fog slither up and out of the rain stick. We screamed at the top of our lungs. We ran out of the apartment as I dropped the stick. We calmed down each other, thinking about what we should do. I told her about the vision I had while playing the rain stick. She decided we needed to find a curandera and a curandero. They clear spirits from houses. We figured it had been used for voodoo or something and wondered where this thing originated from. We realized that we didn't know exactly how old the thing was and how many people had owned it before us. We prayed that whatever came out of the stick didn't follow us to the car. We were freaked out, scrambling through a phone book seeking a curandera. We drove to the Mexican side of town, desperately seeking the curandera. But it was just past 10 p.m. and all the spirit and psychic shops were closed. We built up enough courage to return home. The smell of campfire was gone. I called this musician I was dating at the time. His mom was a very well-respected psychic in Dallas. He told me to wrap the stick in a red material and place it in the closet next to the front door. After 2 hours, me and my mama bear felt uncomfortable with it still in the house and placed it right outside our front gate. The next day, one of my sister's friends came by, a Native American man who was referred to as Ashtray. He knew I liked smoking ganja and he brought a joint. I asked if he could get a bag of bud for me. He mentioned he was hanging with a friend that night, but had not brought him over because we didn't know him. Ashtray left to go get me my sack. I left to walk 2 buildings over to hang with this hot guy I knew while I waited. I noticed at the building facing ours, there was a dude about 16 years old, standing behind the staircase staring at our apartment. I assumed it was Astray's friend waiting for him to come back. I said, "You don't have to wait up there, dude. You can come in." He didn't say anything and came inside. We were chilling, watching TV. Ashtray returned with his dime bag and we all got stoned. Eventually, the dude I found behind the stairs said he had to take off. He left and asked Ashtray how they'd been friends. He told me that he didn't know who that guy was, and the friend he said that he was hanging out didn't want to come the whole time. I was pretty freaked out and told my mom about it. All three of us opened the door and noticed the rain stick was gone. We know that creepy guy probably took it. My sister came back from Michigan the next day. I described the guy from the stairs and she knew who I was talking about. A week later, she informed me that he hadn't been at the school for several days and his parents were looking for him. I had a feeling that it had something to do with him stealing our haunted rain stick.
I grew up in a middle-class suburb/rural New England town. My mother was the essential soccer mom. Whatever interest I had, she found a coach for it. So, when it became clear that I wasn't going to lose interest in guns, she went out and found a coach so I would learn how to shoot properly and safely. The man she found was the husband of her friend. Let's call him Mr. NRA. He was an NRA certified instructor and avid hunter. He taught me all about firearms, and I, the trivia master about firearms, when I went to basic training some years later, but before then, I had gone to college. The end of my freshman year, I was called back to my hometown to attend Mr. NRA's funeral. His widow and 2 sons invited me to their place after the funeral. It had been decided that I should receive the Bane. You know, the bar from the U.S. World War I and II Army frame. This one had been made in Europe for the Swedes in the 1920s and 6.5 Swedish. The markings stated that it entered the U.S. in the early 1960s after being rechambered for 8mm Mausers and reduced to semi-auto only. Sometime between the 60s and the 80s, a hack rechambered it back to 6.5 Swedish. The end result was the former machine gun was then a bolt-action rifle. In 2 decades of tinkering, Mr. NRA had been able to get it working as a semi-automatic rifle. The family had come to the conclusion that I should have it and the stock of the 6.5 Swedish ammunition. This made sense, since that was the only gun in the chamber. So, I went back to school with a bolt-action bar, 3 cases of surplus ammo, and 7 hands loaded of hunting round. The next year, we had a 4-day weekend, and one of my friend's family had bought a hunting cabin on the edge of town that they lived in. This season started that Saturday, so Thursday night we left school, went to the cabin. Driving into town, it becomes clear that the grew sideways. The oldest part of the town was on one side, and the newest parts were stretching out to the other. The cabin was on the north side of the old side. I shared a driveway with the ruins of the church on the east side of the driveway, and the cemeteries were on the west side. The cabin was on the south end of the property, some 100 yards behind where the church had been and the historical society notice. We got there right about twilight and started unpacking the trucks. By the time we finished setting up the cabin, it was dark. I went out to my SUV and noticed someone in the driveway by the road. It looked like a girl watching me. I didn't think much of it, since there were a few houses around. One of my friends came out and asked what I was looking at. I told him, and the first thing he asked was, "By girl, are we talking minor or college-age cutie?" I called him a Romeo wannabe and finished what I was doing. Friday during the day, we got up, ate, and after some screwing around, we took the half-mile walk out to the hunting grounds. We noted by the signs, marking it a private property for hunting signs by Romeo's father and the local game warden. We scouted around, but didn't find much in the way of deer track, and oddly enough, not much in the way of chipmunk either. Now, anyone who has spent time in the woods in New England knows that it is about impossible not to see chipmunks in the early fall. Around lunchtime, we headed back to the cabin, and as we got there, we decided to go check out the church and the cemeteries. When we got there, I expected that the one by the road was the older one and the one behind it was the newer one, since the first one had a wall around it. But a sign put up by the Historical Society informed us that the two were the same age. The one in the wall was consecrated holy ground, and the second one next to it was one for the damned. Poor, suicides, convicted criminals, and etc., who hadn't confessed, and other immoral people in the colonial era. The sign also told the story of the church burning down between the election of Lincoln and the start of the Civil War, after being struck by lightning. The story finished with the note about the town voting against Lincoln because they didn't want to push for the abolition, and after the church was struck by lightning, practically the whole town enlisted in the Union Army. While I read this, Dumb and Dumber were going over tracks in the dirt driveway. They called me and Romeo over and pointed them out. A barefoot woman walked out of the sinner's graveyard, walked down the driveway towards us for a few yards, and then went back into the graveyard. I figured that it was some weirdo who had gone into the church graveyard, then hopped the stone more into the sinners and came to check us out. We went back to the cabin and got our stuff ready, since we would be getting up early so we could get to our hunting spot at the crack of dawn. We spent the afternoon gearing up and joking around. Saturday was a bust. Collectively, we all saw one deer that day, a doe with an interesting set of scars on its left side. We walked out into the woods trading stories and pictures some of us had taken of the deer. By the time we got to the cabin, it was dark out, and I could have sworn that I saw a figure creeping in the sitter's graveyard. We only had Sunday, since we have to be back to school on Monday. Sunday, we went out early and stayed out as late as possible, so it was dark before we left the woods. As we walked out of the woods, we spotted the girl in the driveway. Romeo handed his rifle to Dumber and started jogging down the driveway. We made snarky comments about ourselves and started to head into the cabin. We paused to unload our rifles. That was when we heard the scream. The girl was trying to take a chomp at Romeo like a zombie. Dumb and Dumber rushed to help Romeo while I reloaded my rifle. Dumb and Dumber knocked the girl off Romeo with their rifles. They knocked her to the ground and then started putting rounds into her with no effect. When I ran up, she seemed to panic. I swung Bane on target and put one round into her chest, just missing her heart. She screeched when I shot her and ran off into the graveyard. It was right about that point that police showed up. They told us to get on the ground and demanded to know what was going on. We told them that some girl attacked our friend and we had gotten to defend him. Two of the cops went to search the graveyard while two stayed with us. One of the officers checked Romeo and called for an ambulance. The two officers searching the graveyard came back and said they found a trail that led to the oldest of the sinners' graves, but it disappeared. We were taken to the police station and questioned. I got grilled over the ammo I used. Late the next day, we were released after someone had come forward to give a statement that backed up our account of events. Romeo spent the next 2 weeks in the hospital. He had been bitten by a human, and the bite became infected. The DA contacted me multiple times, and while the DA's office decided not to press charges against us, the case remains open since the girl was never found. First off, I'd like to mention that these are experiences I had many years ago, and they were all in dreams, so there's a large chance that not all is remembered. But this is how I remember them happening. Secondly, I'd like to say that the last dream I had in the first story was when I was 9 or 10, and I'm 14 now. So once again, there's a definite portion of this that is true, but I'm not sure what really happened, and what my memory has messed up. Thirdly, these are 3 separate experiences, but I can't help but feel that they're all combined in some way. These dreams started when I was only about 6, and they were normally short, strange scenes of me waking up in my room, and some gruesome, monstrous creature, always looking different at the beginning, would either scream, roar, or just completely attack me. and I'd wake up in a cold sweat. As I got older, the dreams got longer, diving more in depth into the story. The first change I remember is sometimes I'd see it get to me, and I'd wake up with a weird pain in my chest. Other times, however, I'd escape it, and before anything else would happen, I'd wake up. Every month or so that this went on, the dreams would get longer, and the monstrous creatures would always get more gruesome and scarier. One time, I ended up escaping the monster and making it to my basement for safety. After the one time this occurred, it would always be me running to the basement for safety. I would run into the laundry room for safety, and my mom would lock the door with me and run inside. But the door wasn't able to hold it. I remember seeing these bloody claws ripping through the thick wooden doors and my mom flipping out, sending me and my sister to hide. After we hid, there'd be a loud scream followed by silence. Every once in a while, it'd find me, and each time the dream occurred, it was like the creature was learning and understanding how I thought because it would occur more often. The gruesome creature would sometimes eat my sister in front of me, only to force me to wake up, and other times it would torture me, waking me up only after it seemed satisfied. These dreams occurred through a 3-year period, happening about one time a week, maybe even twice. Sometimes it was down to one time a month. The last time I ever had a dream like this, it was the same exact thing, except for this time, when it came to taking either me or my sister, I stood up to it. I remember its beady, red eyes glaring at me, and its smile with sharp, bloody teeth as if it were enjoying this. It was about 7 feet tall and had razor-sharp claws. Its body was fat and covered in matted brown fur. The creature laughed, and till this day is still one of the most sinister things I think I've ever heard. I had terrible anger issues back then, and so I was about to scream my head off at this. I looked it dead in the eyes and screamed at it to go away, and then I woke up. These dreams never occurred again. The strange experience was, when I was a bit older, maybe 10 or 11, I woke up from normal sleep, but I didn't feel awake. I think it might have been sleep paralysis, but I'm not sure, because I've never experienced this since. I felt a cold tab on my hand, and I had a shiver roll down my spine. Wanting to see what tapped my finger, I rolled my head over. I saw an 8-foot-tall shadow crouched over me with the long fingers extending. I tried to scream and move, but I couldn't make a noise. I shut my eyes and held them shut, and that's where I think I fell asleep. I don't remember anything after I shut my eyes, so that's where that part ends. The last experience I had was when I was 12. I fell asleep like any ordinary night, but then my dream started. I think it was an out-of-body experience, but I'm not sure. I was standing in my room, but I saw myself in my bed, sleeping. I was confused and looked around my room. There were weird looming shadows, and when I looked back at my body, something was lifting me up. I don't completely remember what it was, but I do remember seeing it carry me over its shoulder into my living room. I followed it, and I saw it throw my body on the couch, and that's when I moved towards myself, only to wake up in the exact spot I had seen myself in my dream. I have no clue how I got there, and what happened during the dream, but these are the 3 scariest things that have ever happened to me. We don't know what to do. It's getting so bad in the 20 years, and this is by far the worst. Both my parents grew up in a haunted house, and of course my siblings and I have all grown up in a haunted house as well. At first, my parents thought my brothers just had an imaginary friend, and his name was Joe, and he lived in the closet. My brother woke up screaming in the middle of the night. I was a baby, so I don't remember, but I've seen pictures. My parents ran in there. He had blood all over his sheets and 3 very long cuts down his back. They had bunk beds, and my other brother was on the bottom. My parents said he was so pale he wouldn't even say a word. Things calmed down for a really long time until I was about 10. I had one of my friends staying over, and we were staying up really late playing games and doing what little girls do. We started to hear scratching coming outside of my door. I had a cat, so I thought it was her. I went to open it. But when I did, there was nothing there. So we shrugged it off. Then it started again, and the doorknob started to jiggle, and it slowly opened, and there was a dark figure standing there. It looked like it was out of breath, and its shoulders were going up and down. Then it lunged at us. We screamed, and my parents came running in. Nothing or nobody was in the house. She never stayed again and stopped being my friend shortly after. 9 years later, just little things were happening, nothing too scary. My boyfriend, now husband, went off to basic, and I still lived with my parents. I was only 19. I had my dog Zeus, who was sleeping on my bed with me. He is a yellow lab. It was about 6:30 in the morning, and I had to be up at 8:30 for work. He woke me up by growling. Then I heard a weird voice in my ear speaking a language I didn't understand. When I started to open my eyes, it started growling in my ear. I opened my eyes fast and my door slammed. My dog was standing over me with his hair standing up, looking like he was about to attack something. Everyone was at work, and I heard banging around coming from my parents' room. I got Zeus off of me, jumped out of bed, and ran to my parents' room. Cabinets were opening and closing fast, and things were going thrown everywhere. All around the room, things were just being thrown. It wouldn't stop. I went running out of the door, and it slammed shut. My dog now was running around the house barking and growling. Started running into the door. I said F it and ran out there and grabbed my work clothes, my dog, and got the heck out of there. I dropped my dog off at my friend's and went to work early. When I got home, my parents' room was destroyed. My mother was crying and my dad was pissed. I told them everything. We decided not to talk about it again and went on with the rest of the day. My brother still lived with my parents as well. The night my door kept opening and closing, I kept hearing something running in the hallway. Initially, I thought it was him. I slipped on my slippers and stomped to his room. I was going to yell at him and to tell him to knock off his stupid stuff, but when I opened the door, he was snoring. I woke him up and made him promise it wasn't him. He told me to leave his door open to see if anything changes. I'm halfway down the hallway. My brother yells at me to run to my room and to not look back. Of course, I turn around instead. As I turn around, I see a large black figure standing in this doorway, staring at me. It had large, red eyes, just staring at me. I froze and started to whimper. My brother, being the protected big brother, came charging in, telling the thing to leave me alone, and when he got there, it disappeared. My brother ran to me and led me to my room, and slept on the floor that night to stay with me. And I didn't get any sleep that night. Now, a year later, I'm 20. My husband is away for the army at the moment, and we are waiting for our plumbing to be done at our new house. Last night we had a bad rainstorm. I woke up to growling again, but I couldn't move. Out of the corner of my eye, there was a figure with red eyes just staring at me. Thunder started, and it opened its mouth so wide it could have fit my whole head in its mouth. It had huge sharp teeth and long skinny tongue. It started to scream, and my ears started to ring. I wanted to cover them, but I couldn't. My dog half growled and whined and started to bark. My parents came running in, covering their ears, but stopped in mid-run when they saw the thing. My dad came running to me and picked me up and carried me out of the room. My dog followed. Zeus had his back to us so he could face the thing, and he never took his eyes off the figure until it was out of sight. I finally was able to move, and I started crying and shaking uncontrollably. My brother lives here as well as his girlfriend. We all heard her scream. Then she started banging on the door, so my dad opened it, and she came running in crying and shaking. We all started to ask where Mike is. Before she can answer, he came out of the room, on his hands and feet with black eyes, just staring at us. We all froze, none of us knowing what to do. My brother then popped his neck and started running for us. My dad slammed the door and locked it. My brother started running against it. He was a madman. My mom was screaming for it to get the hell out of her house, and just kept repeating this while throwing things and stomping. Then it goes quiet. My dad opened the door. My brother was passed out on the floor, with the door with his nose bleeding. When my brother woke up, we told him everything. He didn't remember a thing. All he remembers was hearing screaming, and then it all went black. He tells us sorry and then says he's gonna stay quiet for the rest of the night. There was no more activity that night either. Nobody slept last night. We all called in and tried to figure something out. Now it is the next night, and it's 11 at night, and we are hearing growling and scratching through the house. We can't do this again. Please, if anybody knows what's happening, help us. I'll keep you all updated as soon as I can. Thank you for sharing this on your channel.